Today, Vincent van Gogh is regarded as one of the greatest post-impressionist painters. Famously a tortured genius that was underappreciated in his own time, Van Gogh features heavily in modern pop culture, including in Irving Stone's 1934 biographical novel and the subsequent 1956 film starring Kirk Douglas, Don McLean's 1971 song Vincent, Joni Mitchell's Turbulent Indigo, Tupac Shakur's Starry Night poem, a 2010 biopic starring Benedict Cumberbatch, and even an episode of British sci-fi series Doctor Who. But what do we really know about the life of one of the world's most famous painters? Van Gogh was born on March 30, 1853, in the Dutch village of Zinder. As a youth, he was quiet and introverted, spending most of his time in the Dutch countryside. When he was 16, his uncle, also named Vincent, secured him an apprenticeship in an art dealership in The Hague. Uncle Sien, as Van Gogh called him, was a partner in the dealership called Goupil & Company and was a significant influence on Van Gogh's life. As well as being named after him, it appears that Sien treated Van Gogh as a son due to not having any children himself. At the dealership, Sien helped lesser-known Dutch artists whose work he felt were saleable, providing materials and financial support. At Goupil & Company, Van Gogh showed pride in his and his uncle's shared name and excelled in his position as an office clerk. When he was 20, Van Gogh was transferred to the London branch. In London, his passion for the work deteriorated, and his view on life was darkened when a local girl rejected his attempt at courtship. Although his dedication to his work waned, Van Gogh was entranced by artwork itself, developing a deep appreciation for the works of Rembrandt, Frans Hals, Jean-Francois Millet, and Camille Corot. After leaving Goupil & Company, he moved from job to job, working as a language teacher and lay preacher in England, and then as a bookseller in the Netherlands. In 1877, feeling compelled to serve humanity, Van Gogh took up theology before training as an evangelist in Brussels in 1878. After failing to get an appointment, he decided to work as a missionary amongst the impoverished people of the Borinage region of Belgium. Van Gogh's health suffered as he gave most of his food away to peasants. His teeth began to fall out, and he contracted scurvy through the lack of fresh food. Soon, his faith in the church was shaken when he was dismissed for interpreting the Christian teachings too literally, as he had given away all his worldly possessions to the poor. Van Gogh was utterly disheartened by this, confiding in an acquaintance, "They think I'm a madman because I wanted to be a true Christian. They turned me out like a dog, saying that I was causing a scandal." This setback pushed Van Gogh into art, and by 1880, he had decided he could serve humanity through his creativity. He decided to study drawing at the Brussels Academy before moving back to the Netherlands in 1881. By this time, Van Gogh's family had moved to Etten, where his father was a vicar at the local church. At the age of 28, Van Gogh moved back in with his family and dedicated himself to becoming a full-time artist. Here, he spent several months drawing local scenes of peasants and laborers performing their routine tasks, including his multimedia drawing Road in Etten. However, he soon realized that self-teaching would only get him so far, and that he needed the guidance of more experienced artists. In late 1881, he returned to The Hague to work with Dutch landscape painter Anton Mauve. In January 1882, Van Gogh met the only woman he would ever live with. Placina Marie Hornick, affectionately known as Sien, would work as a prostitute in The Hague when Van Gogh approached her and asked her to model for his drawings. The pair entered into a relationship, and Van Gogh invited Sien and her 5-year-old daughter to live with him. Sien had a number of health issues, including venereal diseases such as gonorrhea and syphilis, that she almost certainly passed on to Van Gogh. In July 1882, Sien gave birth to a boy whom she named after Van Gogh, using his middle name Willem. Although historians unanimously agree that the young Willem was not Van Gogh's son, the rumors at the time were enough to get Van Gogh struck from his uncle Sien's will. Sien had become increasingly disappointed with Van Gogh's lifestyle choices since he had left the art dealership, and his relationship with Sien was most likely the final straw, causing him to receive no share in his uncle's estate despite previously being hailed as his heir. When Van Gogh's father learned of the relationship, he pressured his son to end the affair. Despite his family's disapproval, Van Gogh clearly cared for Sien and her children. He wrote to his brother Theo, professing, "I don't want her to feel abandoned and alone for a moment longer. I feel a tender love for her and hold her children dear." Van Gogh was worried about Sien, who had confessed to him that her laziness had led her to a life as a prostitute and that her life was bound to end up with her jumping in the water. Van Gogh wanted to marry Sien, but his brother urged him to end the relationship. In the fall of 1883, Van Gogh left Sien and her children. Alone and struggling, Sien gave her children up to the care of her mother and brother. Despite securing gainful employment as a seamstress and marrying Anton van Wyck in 1901, her prediction of jumping in the water came true in 1904 when she drowned herself in the Schelde River. After leaving Sien in The Hague, Van Gogh professed a desire to be alone with nature and moved to Drenthe, an isolated part of the northern Netherlands. Although he only spent 3 months in Drenthe, he wrote 23 letters detailing the peace and calmness he felt amongst the picturesque and inspirational surroundings. But soon, loneliness and financial problems drove him to return to his family, who were still living in Brabant but had moved to a new village, Nuna. Van Gogh found returning to his family hard, as he felt he no longer fit in. He saw himself as a peasant painter who did not think about his standing in life, whereas he viewed his family as people who keep up a position. During his time at Nuna, he painted many scenes linked to the life of peasants, like landscapes, figures, and still life, including his famous painting, The Potato Eaters. Soon, clashes with his family and new artistic ideas about color, inspired by the works of Eugène Delacroix, Paolo Veronese, and Peter Paul Rubens, fueled his decision to leave Nuna and move to Antwerp in Belgium in 1885. There, he enrolled at the Antwerp Academy, but he soon began to find the lessons tedious and instead found inspiration in the Impressionist painters and Japanese prints. During his time in Antwerp, his health suffered as he spent most of his money on paint and canvases rather than proper food. He lived almost exclusively off bread and coffee, smoking copious amounts of tobacco to ward off hunger cravings. Van Gogh wrote to his brother Theo, telling him he had been to a dentist and had to have 10 teeth removed. Having lost most of his teeth, Van Gogh developed a habit of not smiling. He left the Antwerp Academy in 1886 and traveled to Paris to live with Theo. In Paris, he met modern artists such as Henri de Toulouse-Lautrec, Paul Gauguin, Camille Pissarro, Georges Seurat, and more. He was introduced to the Parisian artists by Theo, who had become a prominent art dealer. Van Gogh quickly discovered that the dark palette he had favored in Holland was now thought of as out of date. He began introducing more color to his paintings, producing still lives of flowers and striving to develop his own style. Studying and experimenting with Impressionist, Post-Impressionist, and Japanese printing techniques, Van Gogh began to create a unique style that would become synonymous with his name. While mingling with modern artists in Paris, he indulged in the lifestyle that came with it, drinking copious amounts of wine and his favorite tipple, absinthe. He often engaged in fierce debates about art, usually under the influence of alcohol, which caused the arguments to spiral out of control. Despite his decadent lifestyle, his artistry improved significantly. By the beginning of 1887, he was using a broken brushwork style reminiscent of pointillism and a vivid color palette. In 1888, he had settled on his distinctive style and now desired to revisit the countryside with his new passion for color. So in February, he left Paris for southeast France. In Arles, he continued his love of alcohol, although since absinthe was scarce, he settled for cheap wine. Over the next year, he produced beautiful and colorful landscapes, still lifes, and portraits. This time is generally seen as his first great period. He attempted to capture a mood rather than just depict what he saw, and worked with speed and spontaneity, squeezing the tubes of oil paint directly onto the canvas. He was now so sure of his own work that he confidently told Theo, "When anyone says that such and such is done too quickly, you can reply that they have looked at it too fast." While living in Paris, he had wanted to form a distinct Impressionist group with artists he saw as having a similar view. In Arles, he hoped to realize this dream and invited the likes of Toulouse-Lautrec and Gauguin to join him in forming an artistic community that he planned to call the Studio of the South. In October 1888, artist Paul Gauguin agreed to join him, partly as a favor to Van Gogh's faithful brother Theo, who had decided to represent Gauguin. The two artists didn't see eye to eye on the purpose of art, and neither were in the best mental or physical health, as both were suffering from alcoholism and syphilis. Perhaps the most notorious incident of Van Gogh's life occurred in December. On Christmas Eve, the two artists got into an intense argument, and Van Gogh reportedly chased Gauguin with a cutthroat razor before using the blade to cut off the lobe of his own ear. At least this was what the pair told the police. The newspapers also ran a story that Van Gogh presented his chopped-off ear to a prostitute in a local brothel. What really happened that night has been lost to history, and none of the eyewitnesses could even agree on how much of the ear was dismembered. What is known is that Gauguin left Van Gogh's residence, known as the Yellow House, shortly after they argued. Gauguin also maintained that he had not seen Van Gogh mutilate himself, and he had left as he had been attacked. Some historians agree with Gauguin's version of events, holding that he was overwhelmed by the mental instability of Van Gogh. Others, like historians Hans Kaufmann and Rita Wildegans, postulate that it was actually Gauguin who cut off Van Gogh's ear while defending himself with a saber. They suggest that both artists agreed to vouch for the self-mutilation story to spare Gauguin from jail. Van Gogh specialist Martin Bailey maintains that Van Gogh did cut off his own ear, but it was unrelated to the argument with Gauguin. Bailey suggests it was more of an act of desperation after discovering his brother, Theo, was engaged. Bailey theorizes that on receiving this news, Van Gogh feared that his brother's loyal and constant support would wane as he built a new family life. Some medical historians even believe that Van Gogh suffered from tinnitus and cut off his ear to avoid hearing the ringing. However it happened, the result was that Gauguin left for Paris and Van Gogh was hospitalized. His dreams of an artistic commune were dashed. After 2 weeks in the hospital, Van Gogh returned home, but it was only a matter of weeks before his mental health deteriorated again. By April 1889, he had requested that he be institutionalized in the St. Remy de Provence asylum. While there, he continued to paint. He produced portraits of his carers in one of his most famous pieces, The Starry Night. A year later, Van Gogh longed to see his brother again and painted souvenirs of Holland, suggesting a profound homesickness. He traveled to Paris in May 1890 before moving on to the village of Auvers-sur-Oise, where he once again returned to painting pastoral scenes. This piece did not last long, and soon he quarreled with his host, Paul Ferdinand Gachet. Van Gogh became plagued with his inability to succeed as an artist and his prolonged financial dependence on Theo, who now had a son. Gripped by despair at his situation, he shot himself in the chest with a pistol. He was found by Theo, still alive, and proclaimed, "I have shot myself. I only hope I haven't botched it." He died 2 days later, at age 37, after telling police that, "What I have done is nobody else's business. I am free to do what I like with my own body." Tragically, Van Gogh's loyal younger brother died just 6 months later. He was diagnosed with dementia paralytica, now known to be a disease caused by syphilis. But the root of the disease was then listed as hereditary chronic disease, overwork, sadness. The causes of Van Gogh's apparent madness are not known and vary from a personality disorder to epilepsy or neurosyphilis. Van Gogh died thinking of himself as a failure, but his body of work from his short time as an artist has become legendary. In 1909, Van Gogh's sister, Anna, was able to sell a painting that enabled her to pay for their younger sister, Wilhelmine's, health care, as, like Vincent, Wilhelmine struggled with her mental health and was institutionalized for 40 years. Anna described the sale of the painting, writing, "I remember when Will got the painting from Vincent, but what a figure! Who would have thought that Vincent would contribute to Will's upkeep in this way?" How would you like to get a deeper understanding of history, impress your friends, and predict the future more accurately based on past events? If this sounds like something you might be into, then check out the brand new Captivating History Book Club by clicking the first link in the description. To learn more about history, check out our Captivating History book series. It's available as ebooks, paperbacks, and audiobooks. If you found the video captivating, please hit the like button and subscribe for more videos like this.